Hey folks, thanks for checking out this video in our series on compression. This time we're focusing on guitars and bass, so let's just jump right in. In this example I'm going to be working on, we have three different types of instruments. Firstly, we'll look at lead guitar lines and then some strummed acoustic guitars. Then after that, we'll move on to the bass. In the picked guitar lead line, we're looking at controlling the attack. I'll show you how the attack and release controls play a big part in this. Then with the acoustic guitar, we're looking at bringing down the transients so they're not popping out too much, but also bringing up the low level information to give the instrument a bit more of a rounded sound. The reasons we compress guitars are quite different to the reason we compress a bass. In my mind, there's one key reason you want to compress a bass, and it's pretty similar to the reason we compress vocals. Some notes are going to ring out more than others, and that will take the listener right out of the experience. We want everything to be as consistent as we can, so the bass just provides that solid foundation upon which everything else will sit. First off though, let's take a look at guitar, because depending on the role the instrument is playing in the mix, we'll be approaching it quite differently. With that in mind, although we're listening to the instrument in isolation, to get a feel for how the compression parameters are affecting the sound on a micro level, we also want to be thinking about it on a macro level, so how those small changes are affecting the role of that instrument in the mix. If something sounds great in isolation, that's only half the battle. We also need to know that what we've done has done its job in the mix as well. So this lead part is quite almost percussive. The pick is a big part of the sound, but there's a danger that we're just going to hear that pick and not get a sense of the whole note. Compression can really help here. So I'll start off by just bringing the threshold down at some pretty standard settings, and we'll just hear how things are affecting it. Okay, so we're bringing down the attack slightly. I think we need to delve into these controls a bit more closely though to really understand what's going on. So you'll see that I've got auto gain engaged at the moment, and this is going to come into play when we take a look at the threshold and ratio, because we're really going to be bringing down the level considerably, and auto gain is kind of just compensating for that, but we'll leave it on just for the moment. Let's focus on this attack control because we've got a pretty healthy amount of compression going on here. The threshold is pretty low. We just want to see what the attack actually does to the sound. If we have it down too low, it's going to be chopping off those peaks entirely, so that percussive element goes away. If we have it up too high, then the whole note is going to come through, and we're not really going to be shaping that transient at all. We want it kind of in the middle of those two. So let's bring it down all the way to start off with, and we're going to hear it really chopping stuff off, and then we'll bring it up and just hear where that kind of sweet spot is. Okay, so this setting, 16.8 milliseconds, around that point, we're actually getting a bit more of a percussive sound. It's kind of making it a little bit more choppy. Anything that was below that was really cutting it off. And you'll hear as I A-B, so as I bring bypass on and off, we're just getting a little bit more attack. It's becoming a little bit more percussive. As I bypass the plugin, you're just hearing the life kind of go out of it in that percussive sense, and it's really getting a little bit more choppy as I bring that attack up. So the reason for that is because we're allowing a little bit of the transient to come through, and we can see that here on the trace as well. We're just allowing a touch of that transient to come through in the same way as we would with drums. We're just allowing a little bit of that top of the note just to come through. That's kind of set nicely. What I want to do though is bring the auto gain off, and you're going to hear how the level of the guitar actually comes down considerably. It's kind of starting there. So this was the point at which we had the threshold before, and you can hear it's coming down an enormous amount. So auto gain is important for that kind of thing, but it's also important to understand that we are bringing that down a considerable amount. So although we're dealing with the overall kind of timbre, the overall kind of shape of the sound, we're also dealing with the level quite considerably. So if we bring auto gain back on, it does come back up. But let's just turn it off again just for a moment and just hear this ratio, because if we bring this all the way down, so previously it was on 5.3, we'll just remember that. If we put it at 1:1 where there's no compression taking place, then we're not going to hear that level drop because there's no compression taking place. But as we start to bring that up, we're starting to attack the sound more. And when we're telling it to compress, as we bring that ratio up, we're telling it to compress more. So the level will drop. You can hear that with the threshold down here at -30, even a small change going from kind of 1.5:1 to 2:1 can make a significant difference. But we had auto gain on, so our ears were being objective about it, and we could hear that with the ratio at kind of 5.3, we were chopping off enough that it was leveling stuff out, and to my ear that was sounding good. So let's bring this back up with the auto gain on, and we're going to be bringing down a decent amount of the overall sound. And you'll hear that as I bring that ratio up, in relative terms, the attack is actually getting kind of louder because we're allowing that to come through relatively uncompressed, and then everything else after that is getting compressed more. So as I bring that ratio up, you'll just hear that attack become more percussive and more apparent. Okay, so let's do an A-B just on a small section, and we'll be able to hear the real difference that we've made to that initial attack. So we know that the attack is going to govern how much of the signal is allowed to come through before it compresses. The ratio is how aggressive that compression is, and the threshold is how much of it is being compressed. But what about the release? Well, the release is kind of the body, and if we have that too fast, then it can really chop stuff off, because if we have the release right down low, we're essentially telling it just to compress for a very small period of time. And that's almost getting towards kind of a distortion effect, almost getting towards a kind of a clipping thing. We're telling it to just chop that transient off and then come straight back up, and that can sound unnatural. Really choppy, really aggressive. But if I brought this up to the kind of default 100 milliseconds, around where it was before, we're going to hear a little bit more of a natural sound. So in this particular instance, the release is not having as much of an effect as it would do in perhaps a drum track or a vocal, because as you can see from the trace, there's not really any point that it's coming back up to zero compression. So that release stage never really happens in its entirety. It's more about this kind of gradient, as you can see here. If we had this down really low, then that would be a much steeper gradient. If we have it up much longer, then it'd be a much longer gradient. In this particular instrument, it's not as much of an issue, but as we move on to acoustic guitar and bass, you're going to see how that really comes into its own. So one last time, this electric lead line plucked kind of percussive-y thing without compression and then with compression. So it's pretty loud in the mix, but you can already hear that that percussive element is kind of coming through. It's poking out the mix just a touch, and it's getting a little bit more of that percussion to the lead part. So for acoustic guitar, we've taken what we've learned from the electric, the picked line, and we're kind of applying it here, but we're often being a bit more gentle. With acoustic guitars, it's very easy to overdo stuff. It's very easy to make them sound unnatural and aggressive. We don't want that. We want them to still be acoustic guitars, acoustic instruments, but we just want to tame them a little bit. So I've just got some basic settings here, and I'm going to bring down the threshold, and we'll just do a little A/B comparison between non-compressed and compressed. Okay, so we're being a bit gentler, but we're adding a little bit to the body of it, and we're trying not to cut off the transient too much while still kind of reining it in a bit. So let's see how these controls are affecting our acoustic guitar. The attack's at around 50 milliseconds. If I bring that down, then you're really going to hear how we're cutting off far too much. We're really getting basically no attack there at all, so we don't want that. We want to bring that up to the point where we're getting enough attack, but it's being reined in enough. And this is going to vary from guitar to guitar, song to song. For my song, 50 milliseconds felt about right, but let's just gut check that. Let's bring that up. Yeah, so it's cutting off the transient enough that it's reining it in, but not enough that it's really taking control too much. If I bring that attack up a bit more, then we're going to hear how it's just not reining in the transient quite enough. Yeah, so around 50 milliseconds attack, me personally, I think that's reining it in just the right amount. With the ratio, we can get very aggressive very quickly. So you'll see how I'm on 2.3 to 1. So I want to be slightly gentler on this than I was on the picked electric guitar, because I don't think it needs it. It doesn't need anything too aggressive. As I bring that ratio up, you'll hear how that aggression really takes place. And this is linked to the threshold as well, but just as I bring this ratio up, you'll hear how it's really attacking the initial transient so much more when I bring it up just a little bit more than 2.3. So as I went up to almost kind of limiting territory, up to 9 to 1, it really got quite aggressive and it really was slamming down on stuff. And this is going to affect the attack and the release and how they behave as well. So for me personally, having a low ratio, 2 point something to 1 or maybe 3 to 1 is where I'm typically aiming for acoustic guitar. But let's just hear that threshold and how that's going to affect things as well, because we can just bring this threshold up to more towards 0 and just affect the peaks, or as we bring it down, we're affecting more than just the peaks and we're affecting that low level stuff as well. It felt like as I brought that threshold down any further than -20, it was just kind of destroying any of the real note there. And we want to bring that low level stuff up. Of course we do. That's part of the job here, but we're just doing it too much by bringing that threshold down too much. Now, the release is, again, we want this to kind of shape the sound. It's got more of an effect than it did in the electric guitar part because that was all about the attack. That was the real percussive stuff. If I bring the release all the way down and then just start bringing it up, we'll see what we hear. So with it really low, we're just getting rid of the attack and we're just coming straight back up again. When I get in this kind of region around 150, somewhere between 100 and 200, you can start hearing that bottom end just come up slightly. And that's the breathing of the instrument. That's where we're bringing up the low level stuff. And you can think of this as a kind of a body control. As I bring this release up, we're starting to get the overall kind of tone of the instrument, and that's being allowed to come through. So the release is when it stops compressing fully, when it comes back up to no compression. For me, somewhere in the 100 to 200 region is kind of right for this because it's allowing it to breathe. Anything too fast, it's just chopping off transients. Anything below that, and it's not really compressing the low level stuff enough. So again, the release control on guitars, don't destroy stuff, don't make stuff bad, because it's not as important as it is with drums or a vocal. It's about just letting things breathe. And as long as you're not chopping things off too much, then your job is kind of correct. If we were to perhaps just pop that on auto, then that would maybe be somewhere in this kind of region, in the 200 milliseconds kind of area. And this is going to listen to the audio and work out a good kind of setting for it. And we can see what the release is as with this, the gradient of where the line, where the orange trace comes back up after it's taken effect. So we can see when I took it off auto, the release got kind of a little bit steeper. So to me, it feels like the auto is actually saying, let's not be quite as fast as that. So it was maybe up in the 300 milliseconds kind of area. If we just pop auto on again, I kind of liked what that was doing. And don't be afraid to use auto settings. You know, we are learning what to do here and we're learning what all of the controls do. But if to you the auto release sounds good, then it's good. And that is something that you should maybe explore. Yeah, it just feels when I've got the compression in there that the body is kind of coming up. It's being tamed slightly on the attack and it just feels a little more together. So let's put it in the mix and see if we've kind of done our job there. So there's a little more attack on it and it's just bringing up the overall body of the sound a bit more to gel in with the rest of the track. To me, that's a nicely compressed acoustic guitar that sits in the track a little bit better. It's shaving off the transients so that they're not attacking our ear too much, but we've still got that percussive element there, but the whole thing just feels a little more gelled together. So when compressing the bass, it's important to define the reason we want to compress the bass. So the reason I want to compress this bass because I don't want any note to be louder than any others. And this is going to be achieved by some fairly heavy-handed compression, but I'm going to show you how to make it not destroy the tone of the instrument. In fact, we're going to be adding to the tone. I want to play the bass in isolation, but also play it in the mix to see how we're leveling it out and creating some cohesion. One thing you may notice is that as I'm leveling these notes out, it's not as if I'm putting a brick wall up there. That's going to be unnatural. There's a slight volume difference still, and that's okay. It's more about making small changes that alter the overall feel. So let's take a look. So I'm going to bring the threshold down and start to kind of hear what's going on. Now, famous hardware compressors that are used on bass guitars have famously extremely fast attack times. So they're really clamping down on transients. So I am going to be pretty fast with my attack times and just see how that's affecting the overall sound. So we attack at around 35, release at 57, ratio at 4. Let's just see how it sounds. Let's bring that threshold down. So we're kind of adding a little bit to the bottom end and we're evening that bottom end out, but just attacking those transients a little. So if we were to bring this attack all the way down, we'll hear that we're actually destroying that initial clank, that initial pick, which we don't really want, especially in a track like this, which is kind of aggressive. We want that there. So because we're being quite aggressive with that, you'll hear as the really low attack times, it's getting kind of a little bit distorted and a little bit unnatural. So we don't want that. We want it to allow the initial transient through and just bring that attack up so it's adding to the percussive effect of it. Let's take a listen to a quick before and after with no compression and then with the compression at the current attack time. Leveling things out and just amplifying that bottom end just a touch, or more accurately, it's making it so that the louder parts, the notes that have got more low end, we're actually giving that low end to the rest of the notes as well. So the ratio I'm being, 4:1 is not too aggressive on those famous hardware compressors I said about. This is kind of the lowest ratio setting that you're really going to find. So we're clamping stuff down, we're not being too aggressive. If I were to bring this up, we're really going to get some slam. And then back at 4:1, you'll hear how it's just breathing a little bit more. So the release is all about the ramp backup, as we've seen in the previous instruments. We don't want this to be too low because, as we saw before, that's almost acting like a clipper. We just want the ramp backup to be nice and natural, and we're only really going to hear this on the long notes. So anything that's quite fast, quite busy, we're not going to hear this too much on. We're really looking at the longer notes. So as I bring this all the way down, we're going to hear something quite aggressive. There we go. It's all about that ramp. As I bring it back up to like 75, we're not getting those obtrusive kind of artifacts. We want the release to be there. We want it to gently come back up on the longer notes. We don't want it to be non-existent. But if it's too long, then on those longer notes especially, it's just going to overlap the attack portion. So let's take a look with it super long. You'll notice that the trace is kind of just staying down all the time because we're not actually giving it the opportunity to release. So we want that down a bit further than that. So I think around that sub 100 kind of area was kind of right for this track. What you will see some people do with bass, which is a cool approach to take, is they kind of split it. So you've got the low frequency stuff and the high frequency stuff. Typically, this is going to be a little more long-winded and you can kind of dig into stuff a little bit more. Let's just see what we can do there. So if we create multi-band, like 2 bands, then this is dealing with all the higher stuff. So we'll hear that now. And then this one, the original one, is dealing with the low end stuff. And the reason you do this is because you want to control that low end differently than the high end. The high end is more about that attack, that kind of pick attack or the finger attack. And you want to be attacking that in a slightly different way. With a low end, soloed as it is now, we can work at just keeping this a bit more level. We don't want to pin it completely, but we can just compress it in a slightly different way. So if we actually bring that ratio down slightly, the low end is not the stuff that's creating that real attack. So we can be a little less aggressive with the ratio and bring that threshold down a touch. So we are just gently squeezing that for a bit more of a signal. And then if we go to the top end, we can then make that so it's a little more aggressive and attacking a bit more of the time. So we really get that pick attack to come through, bring that attack up a touch. And I've got the release down very, very low because we're just aiming to deal with those transients, those high frequency, high mid-range kind of pick attack transients. So if I bring everything in and bring it all together, you're going to hear that we've got a little more control over each individual section. We can just allow those picks to come through a little more without sacrificing that low end. So let's hear it in the mix and just hear exactly how that now comes out. We should hear a little more cohesion in the bottom end, a little more kind of squash and everything just being a little bit more leveled, but we should hear a little bit more attack when we bring that compressor in. Yeah, so we're bringing up that low end and making it all feel a little bit fatter, a little bit more together, but we're able to control that top end slightly differently in multi-band mode, which is really great for an instrument that has quite a range of frequencies and a range of frequencies we want to affect differently. Hopefully this has given you some good starting points when you're working on guitar and bass compression. Compressing the bass is really about controlling the notes and making them more even, so we're dealing with fairly fast attack times to clamp down on the note on that transient before it gets too loud. With the guitars, we're controlling the attack of the transient, but also trying to bring up that low level information, which is where the note really lies. You can use this knowledge in your next mixes and really listen to how each individual parameter is affecting the sound of your instrument. I'll see you again soon. Take care.